Catherine, your major interest is in the impact of pronunciation and paralinguistic features on the learning. Give us some ideas in this field.
Yeah, I've been interested for a long time in how we can activate people's English. So my experience was that a lot of people come into English language classes having taken passive English language learning prior to entering my classes, for example. So they've studied in high school or they've taken some classes. And then they would come into my classes and they wouldn't feel the English. And my question to myself was, how can you help people to really feel the English, to really appreciate the difference it might have from the first language? And I found that the biggest windows were pronunciation and nonverbal cues, or the paralinguistics, for example, the intonation. And so I read the literature in those areas, and in fact in my master's was really interested in the issue of why teachers don't teach more pronunciation, why they don't teach more paralinguistics. And what I found was teachers don't know enough about it themselves, so they're not able to implement that in the class. But what my finding is that in L1 acquisition, our biggest focus as infants in the parents' arms are the sound of the voices around us, the sound of the movements around us. And we develop a template for our first language. And then as we're born and we're growing up, our parents display for us, first of all, the finest aspects of our first language, all of the intonation, all of the pronunciation, all of the words directed at the beloved infant are very positive. And then when that child gets to be about 18 months old, the parents demonstrate a different style of language, which is usually be careful, don't touch that, etc. And what I found in observing numerous second language classrooms is that many teachers stay in what I would call kind of the dead zone. They stay in an area where people are kind and polite and producing English, and all of the materials are kind and polite and representing English, but they're not representing the whole spectrum of English. And so the student's brain doesn't get a window into how that language functions. How do you express negativity in that language? How do you express positivity? What is a neutral, pleasant-sounding English? Because usually they only hear the neutral, pleasant-sounding English. So I started to experiment in my classrooms with not being mean to my students, but with showing them how English would sound in different environments and the variety in the repertoire that a native speaker has. And I found that that really woke students up. Then I looked at the research that we process nonverbal cues milliseconds before we process the verbal cue. So I started to think, if I'm teaching, for example, pronunciation, and the student's having a problem with aspirating the initial consonant p, what if I add a nonverbal gesture like p, and every time that word comes up, the student sees the gesture just before I'm reminding them to make the sound? Would that activate their understanding of that concept? And I found that absolutely it did. So I tend to tie a nonverbal cue with a verbal understanding of the wide range that could be used on intonation and on tone of voice. And I find that students will grasp vocabulary more quickly, they'll grasp chunks of language more quickly, and there's a sudden and very impressive improvement in their listening skills and their speaking skills, and interestingly enough, in their ability to scan and skim a reading passage.
Thank you.